to suggest to add to the list, but I think I passed out. Was parsing and
You
uh,
know,
damage
yeah,
meters.
well, I have a little bit of, I have a little bit about parsing down below. Yeah,
Okay.
that's another kind of interesting thing because and it's kind of tied in kind of like with a lot of kind of this topic that we're talking about, kind of like uh, constructive criticism versus toxicity
Oh
in
yeah,
rating
that's right.
environments.
I did bring that up. Okay, we're
Yeah,
good.
yeah. Because like a lot of times, like rating communities can kind of come across as a little bit toxic. Like I think the prime example of this was like the main rating community for World of Warcraft is this play this website called Elitist Jerks.
And it wasn't even being ironic.
I mean, yeah, it's basically like um, the idea being like obviously the people doing this thing are vastly superior, and and you get that's like with like pretty much kind of any sort of hardcore player though. I play another game, Dungeons and Dragons Online, that basically has raids of a sort. They're not really, like I guess there's a couple that kind of like I would kind of consider kind of true raids, um, but one of the problems you run into is that there's certain expectations. Like I posted like one time I posted a build up on the forums for it's like a very effective character class.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody's like, oh, well, I can't go solo this thing on the hardest difficulty using your stupid build, therefore it's garbage.
Right.
I'm like, but this is like a really good build for like the for the 90% of people that aren't doing that.
Right.
Oh, it's a flavor build. It's kind of but you get kind of the same thing with with rating and whatnot. Like there's kind of this group thing, you got to do it this way, or you need to kind of meet a certain minimum level of performance, and like people don't want to necessarily invest the time into helping people improve themselves. They just want to they just basically kind of want to wave their EP and say, oh, I'm better than you are.
It's very me oriented.
Right. The idea of I mean, and I think this is like the same with any content. Like in Final Fantasy 14, like I became a mentor because I know most of the dungeons. I like explaining dungeons, and I can kind of boil boss fights down to a couple 3 sentences usually.
Mm-hmm. Most
And
people
so,
became mentors for the icon.
right, basically, so they get the funny, they get the cute little crown next to their name.
Because they were a princess.
Exactly. But like so I like helping people do dungeons, and kind of like having that attitude in rating kind of really helps kind of make it feel a lot less intimidating. But but a lot of people have like are very selfish. Like they want the loot for their own for their own purposes, for their own needs. They really aren't in it basically kind of for the group, which is kind of sad because like a lot of the early rating stuff, that was kind of the idea, was you wanted to be in it for the group. And parsing is a part of this. The interesting thing is like in Final Fantasy 14, parsing is actually prohibited.
Yeah, it's against terms of service. That doesn't stop people from doing it.
Well, the reality is basically like as long as you're not being an asshole about it and you're not throwing it in somebody's face.
Yeah, like I do parsing when I'm like doing trials and stuff, but that's just so that I can figure out how to rotate per phase, basically.
Right. Like what where you look at where your DPS dropped and whatnot. I mean, yeah, and so like this is kind of like the conundrum of parsing is that it's basically kind of this double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, people can kind of use it to improve, to figure out what they need to do in order to to become better at playing a class. On the other hand, it's also a tool that people use to kind of throw in other people's face, saying you suck and I rock.
Right.
We used to talk about the concept of these meter maids that would people who basically would focus so much on the DPS meters and their parsing that they would basically like essentially they would ruin the raid in other ways.
Right, right. Yeah, and WoW, when I was raid leader, I actually had rules that people weren't allowed to post meters in the chat.
Right, right.
Until the raid was over, and then people could go through and see their numbers.
Right, right.
Or I tell them just get your own meter and stop pestering
Right,
for people
right.
to post because it's a distraction.
Right, right. Especially in World of Warcraft, like it's it's such a mod friendly game that there's very little reason not to have your own meters. In Final Fantasy 14, it's a lot more difficult because there isn't the mod infrastructure for the game.
Yeah, they've talked about putting an API in for UI mods. Like back at the beginning of Realm Reborn, they said, "Oh yeah, we're thinking about it."
Right, right. I mean, that's definitely kind of like a loaded gun you're handing the community though sometimes.
Right. But then they never brought it up again, so I'm assuming they decided not to.
Right. But yeah, like the customer service people can't tell if you're running mods or not. But basically, so like you said, the kind of practical rules. It's kind of if you're going to be an asshole about it or whatnot. And so we're kind of closing up on this one. So kind of the next thing we had to talk about was kind of looking at raid design. And what it takes to looking at kind of a lot of the elements of raiding from a game development point of view. So I think that like raiding has always been one of the things where basically kind of going back to we talked about the history. Early raiding was kind of like a very player motivated thing. Players wanting to say, "Oh, can we kill these big monsters that the developers might have intended to be unkillable?"
It was a challenge.
Right, it's a challenge. But then later, Craft and a lot of other games, you have a lot of it's become much more of a developer motivated process.
Oh, we know players want this, so we have to put it in our game.
Right, and, or the developers kind of set the rules for how the raids operate. So I think again as we said repeatedly, I think one of the most important things you got to remember is like the number of players that do any raiding is pretty small. Like most of your people are going to be looking at basically don't have the time to do a very intensive raiding. And most of the people who are going to be doing raiding are probably going to be doing like the more casual stuff that your hardcore people are going to kind of look down on as like not really raiding. And so I think that that doesn't mean necessarily like Big Mikey Ocho said, we don't like some people would be happy if raids went away completely. Why don't we? Given it's such a small thing, because like we said before, it's an aspirational thing. Like you look at the raider with their cool gear and their sparkly bits and their massive weapon and their cool appearance, and you're like, I want to do that too.
And if we took away like raiding as we have it today, people would look to turn something into that challenge.
Right.
Like they would find their own player-made challenges some way or another. Like pull half the zone and see how long you can last, kind of stuff.
Right. Well, I mean, we talked about it too. I guess kind of hopping back to player behaviors a little bit. A lot of times players, when they weren't raiding, would basically kind of like create their own things.
Run dungeons naked, hogger raids.
Right. Or in Final Fantasy 14, like a big thing with speed runs, like do a normal dungeon, but basically like time yourself and try to get through it as fast as possible. Right.
And then they set up leaderboards on the parsing sites and.
Right.
It's a whole huge ordeal.
Right, right. And so like like you can't necessarily get rid of kind of that the mentality that encourages raiding. Um, even if you personally don't find it all that interesting.
Because that's just that's the achiever
Right.
personality type.
That's the ultimate expression of the achiever. They want to, um, they basically want to show a mastery of the game as much as possible. And so, and then kind of like a flip side of like like how do players learn is like a question of like how's the game teach mechanics. Like Final Fantasy 14 relies on kind of a lot of a lot of general mechanics that that they repeat in different areas. So if you see a giant four-pronged arrow orange thing above your head with the arrows pointing inward, that generally means everybody needs to stack on you to
absorb the damage.
Right, to basically to spread the damage around.
And like
rather than you take it.
Sorry, finish. Go ahead.
Rather than you take it all yourself, yeah.
Or like if you get a big purple debuff called Doom, you're about to die.
Right.
And the healer needs to do something to fix it.
Right, right. Usually heal you back up to full,
Or Asuna it, or
right.
Or you have to find something on the floor to stand on that removes it. That's been the reoccurring one. The cleansing plates.
Right.
Because they did that several times. Like the big purple debuff means you have to do something or you're gonna die when the timer hits 0.
Right. And so the game, having to teach these mechanics over time, and kind of understanding transferring that from I remember what this mechanic was when I did the 4-player dungeon. Now that we're in the 18-player or 24-player alliance raid, I remember I have to do this thing, the same thing, stack, find a thing, whatever it is.
And the 14 does a very good job at introducing those different mechanics at various points throughout the leveling process in the game. So I will give 14 credit for that. That it doesn't just throw them at you when, in a high stakes thing. It introduces them in leveling dungeons.
Right. It's kind of up to you. I mean, and this is like, a lot of games, a lot of the best games tend to do this too. Like, using a non-MMO example, Mario games, would do this a lot, where you would kind of run into a new mechanic, like especially, with a lot of the games where Mario gets various abilities, you'd get an ability, you'd get a place where you needed to use the ability to continue on, and that would give you a basic grasp of how the system worked.
Yeah, actually, like the first level of Mario is a really good example of like a tutorial level.
Right.
Because like what are the first 3 things that you see when you start, World 1? You see
right.
Normal bricks, you see 2 normal bricks, you see 2 question blocks, and a Goomba.
Right.
And that teaches you everything you need to know about the game. That you have to jump on the Goomba and you can hit the blocks from beneath and knock things out of them or break them when you get big. Like it teaches you everything you need to know in that first few frames of the game.
Well, not quite everything, but it teaches you most of the basics, or you can it gives you kind of like a little thing where you can kind of explore around and figure out things, figure out jump physics and how to land on enemies precisely and all that stuff.
Big Mikey says that first Goomba has killed more people than any war ever has.
Pretty much, yes.
Did it. Oh my goodness. I mean, he's not wrong. Or like the first enemy that you run into, like Ocarina of Time. How do I swing my sword? Oh, my food's here. Anyways, here, I'll take yours. Oops.
Yeah. I think that we were another thing we kind of talk about is looking at kind of the idea, because kind of what we're talking about, like a lot of the reason why people kind of focus on loot is because we have kind of the idea of the progression type raids. As I said before, you do raid A to get loot A, which gives you the the proper level of power. So you do raid B to get loot B that gives you enough power to do raid C that gives you loot C, and then you kind of like build up like that. So one of the main reasons why you want that loot so badly from a raid is the theory, because in theory you want to basically do the next raid. But of course, like a lot of people kind of not so graciously call this the treadmill. Like you're on this treadmill, you're always kind of running forward, but you're never quite catching up, never quite progressing. Because the next raid boss, you're basically just increasing your item level or your power level or whatnot just to get just to be able to do the next level of the rating.
Yeah, and 14 actually just had its last just like acknowledged that it's on its last tier of gear for the current expansion pack. So they increased the cap, the weekly cap in which you can get the currency to buy the current gear level, so that people can just play catch up at this point. It's a little depressing when you come to that realization that
right, that all the stuff you worked in script and fought for. Yeah, if you're not on the cutting edge, I mean, and like for Final Fantasy 14, this is even true like for normal content too.
I'll be back.
If you're not doing, if you're not doing the cutting edge stuff, you really, it's much easier to kind of gear up and get things done. And because of the Final Fantasy 14 roulettes, content's never ever completely ignored. People will queue. Basically, people will queue for a alliance raid to roulette. They might do the alliance raid from A Realm Reborn. But that's still potentially useful because someone might be going to do that for the first time, trying to get gear or trying to get glamour or whatnot. So yeah, it's a very interesting thing, I guess. The idea that you have like if you're trying to stay on the cutting edge, whether it's raiding or just doing normal content in 14, it's always going to be obsoleted. And basically Final Fantasy 14 does the same thing with World of Warcraft. It's like when there's an expansion, you add some levels onto the top, while all your gear is not going to be obsoleted. And so now you have to you have to gain levels and gain the gear appropriate for doing the end level content released. And that's kind of another idea to kind of looking at is how often you release content, because you're going to release so you have raid B out right now and people are getting gear B. Well, you kind of want to release you want to release raid C before the people getting gear B get bored and say, well, I've got everything, I'm just going to cancel my subscription now. You kind of want to keep them on that gear upgrade path, on that treadmill, because if they leave, there's always a possibility they'll be like, yeah, I don't really miss the game, I'm not coming back. What we used to call exit